Good job, man.
Jeg går ud fra, at du gerne vil have et lille LinkedIn. Draft eller andet, så
Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you who are joining us online from the States or elsewhere. Welcome to everyone. The title of today's event is, as it says on the screen here behind me, Deep Decarbonization of Society, Green Hydrogen and Electrofuels. And obviously the aim is to share experiences, best practices and concrete solutions. My name is Finn Mortensen. I'm the CEO of State of Green, a public-private partnership, not-for-profit. Over the past 14 years, we have worked actively to share Danish green solutions and foster relations with international partners and decision makers like yourselves. Today's event we have organized together with the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities and Yale University in the US. The aim is to build even stronger ties between the US and Danish stakeholders on how to decarbonize our society. We still have a long way to go, that's for sure. And one of the crucial elements of our next steps is the transition. In the transition is to crack the code of Power-to-X or green hydrogen. How do we ensure that our green energy from wind and renewables is fully integrated in the future energy system? I think everybody agrees there's a huge potential within green hydrogen and electrofuels, but the area and solutions are still in the early stages. With this event, we hope to raise awareness, share learnings, and drive the decarbonization even further. I will act as the moderator today, introducing the various speakers and the moderator for the panel. And I will also make sure that we get through the next hour and 10 minutes or so in the best possible way. We have a number of speakers, both from the US and the Danish energy scene joining us. So let's get started. Some are here physically, some are joining us online. It gives me extremely great pleasure to invite our opening speaker to give his remarks. We are very happy to welcome you, Professor Dan Esti. Professor Esti is a renowned researcher and author within the fields of corporate sustainability, regulation, environmental strategies, and sustainable finance. And Dan Esti will touch upon the theme of pathways to deep decarbonization. Professor, the stage is yours.
Finn, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. It's an interesting moment to have this conversation. And I am sure when people started thinking about this maybe 6 months ago, they would not fully have imagined the situation we find ourselves in. And it is a watershed moment, I think. We are in the wake of a pandemic that is not fully behind us. There is economic stress and inflation that's affecting people all over the world. Russia's invasion of the Ukraine has caused really fundamental rethinking of energy strategies across Europe and more fundamentally across the world. And that's all before we get to the topic we're really meant to discuss today, which is climate change and how the world responds to this existential threat. So some of you might think this is actually a bad time for this conversation. I think it's a good time. And I want to just tell you in a few minutes why. First of all, the Glasgow Climate Pact that was agreed upon last November, I think reflects a new and important spirit, a spirit of realizing the significance of the challenge in front of us. As you all probably know, 197 countries got together and said, we are going to set a new, much more tough target for deep decarbonization. we're going to aim now at net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And I think that is notable. And that's governments doing what they must do, which is to give us the direction. But I think what is most important is that we are no longer simply relying on government to set a direction and then to do all the work, but a whole lot of other folks have now stepped up to deliver that deep decarbonization. And I would tell you, particularly notable was the fact that within weeks of that Glasgow Climate Pact, we saw thousands of companies across the world announcing their own net zero pledges, their own net zero game plans. Not all of them fully developed, but those companies are now on the record, and I think are going to be pressed to demonstrate how they're going to change their business models to become truly a clean energy company of the future. I also think that we saw the world of finance beyond the corporate world step up in a way that it never had. I spent a lot of my time studying what works and what doesn't in environmental policy. And I would tell you one of my top observations was that in the 20th century broadly, not only on climate change, but broadly, we spent a lot of time setting targets and not enough time figuring out how to achieve them. We did not analyze what changes of behavior were required, what theory of change we were going to push, who was going to do what and why, who was going to bring the money forward. And I think we are now seeing those questions beginning to be answered in a serious and thoughtful way. And I would again call out the developments in Glasgow, particularly the emergence of the not very well named Glasgow Alliance for Net Zero, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, called GFANZ. Not a good acronym, but a very good idea, launched by the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, mobilizing 435 banks and financial institutions to get them to commit that their lending going forward will be in alignment with a trajectory of emissions towards net zero by 2050. Again, details to be worked out. No guarantees this will actually happen in every one of those institutions, but a signal that change is afoot. I think, in fact, one of the most interesting things now is that in the wake of the Paris Agreement of 2015, the ramping up of the Glasgow Climate Pact of 2021, we're starting to see the kind of conversations that we are going to have here today, where we dig into the details of what's required to go from where we are to where we need to be, and begin to analyze on a much more granular basis who's going to have to make change. And in that regard, the topic we're here to discuss today is fundamental. How do we achieve deep decarbonization in tough to decarbonize sectors? And there are a number of them: cement, steel, chemicals, particular interest in Denmark, shipping, but aviation, agriculture, again of interest in Denmark, all of those interests of interest in the United States, of course. So this is a topic that we all have real need to focus on. And I think if you look at the opportunities, several things emerge. One, hydrogen and electrofuels are one of your better pathways forward. And it is for that reason I'm particularly pleased to be part of this discussion here today. And I think more broadly, the focus we're going to bring today to this issue highlights one of the other elements of my own research that I would tell you is become increasingly clear as I've looked at what it's going to take to really address climate change. And that is the need for a central focus on innovation. Now, I think innovation is often talked about, but I think it's talked about too narrowly. It's talked about as a matter of technology development, and clearly we need that. Again, that's part of the discussion here today. But I would like to urge us to think about innovation more broadly. Innovation in policy. So government has an important role in shaping the marketplace, steering capital, engaging the business community, making it worth their while to invest in solutions, and frankly, give them the incentive to take risks, to try new things that may not always work out. So incentives matter. Finance matters. The flow of money to these efforts is going to be critical. And public engagement is also going to be important. I've spent the last 3 months in Denmark, and one of the great joys is to see a society that is pulling together in many regards to respond to this problem. and has got many sectors thinking about their role, partnerships of all sorts. The State of Green is a great example of a public-private partnership, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. So thank you, Finn, and your team for getting us organized to do this. And thanks as well to Minister Jørgensen and the team at the Danish Climate, Energy and Utilities Ministry. In addition to finance, we do need to think about these partnerships. We need to think about how we bring the different segments and sectors of society, government, by the way, at all levels, not just national, but in big countries like the US, state, and in other countries, provincial governments, and then city scale. It turns out that all of that matters. We're going to need the private sector broadly engaged, the world of finance. We're going to need all kinds of civil society organizations, community organizations, non-governmental organizations. We're going to need the academic community, the research community doing their piece. So this really is a call for transformation, a call for a transformed approach to climate change, not relying on targets and timetables alone set by national governments in big climate negotiations to do the job, but to recognize that's the start of the plan. Anyone in business would tell you that was a mission statement. It was not a strategy or an action plan. So it's up to us, and I hope this conversation begins it today, to really begin to think about what is our plan? What are the pieces? Who's doing what? How does it come together? It's a conversation I think is going to have to take place not only here in Copenhagen, but across all of the countries of the world. And for those of you who are interested, I will be releasing tomorrow again with the minister a report that my team at Yale with colleagues at Columbia University have been working on for the past 2 years. It is focused on an effort to understand and to scorecard who's doing well with regard to sustainability. So we look at 180 countries across the world, and we look at them across 40 different metrics of sustainability. We look at what they're doing with regard to climate change in particular, but environmental public health as well. We're also looking at ecosystem vitality, and all of that comes together and gives us a picture of who's leading and who's lagging. And we will announce tomorrow, without revealing any secrets, that Denmark has ended up in the #1 place. So it's an interesting moment, but it is part of the story of getting into the details, looking in depth at what is required. And I think that's what we all need to do. I've been part of an effort in the US called the Zero Carbon Action Plan for America. And it is looking at, again, on a granular basis, what's required. And I think that comparative analysis, looking at what different countries are doing, is what we all need to spend some time on. So let's begin that conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dan, for this inspiring speech. And I can only echo what you said about Glasgow, the COP26. We were there. We had a Danish pavilion. And for the first time ever, we had a lot of financial institutions joining us who wanted to be part and close to the negotiators. So there is definitely change taking place. And the other point I wanted to make was your call for looking at innovation in a broader perspective, also to include government policy, which I think is definitely necessary in years to come. But without further ado, let me now introduce our next speaker. I'm happy to welcome, here she comes, Kelly Speaks-Backman, who is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the US Department of Energy. And in her role, Kelly leads and directs the office focused on creating and sustaining American leadership in the transition to a global clean energy economy. Kelly Speaks-Backman is joining us online. Here she is. So please welcome, Kelly. Good morning to you, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all today, even if virtually. I'm Kelly Speaks-Backman, and I do lead the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, or EERE, as we like to call it, because we love our acronyms here. I'm excited to talk about the United States and Denmark's clean energy programs and collaborations ahead of next week's IEA Global Conference on Energy Efficiency, for which I will be able to travel to Denmark for an actual in-person meeting. So I'm pretty excited about that. But with our shared climate and energy goals, the US and Denmark have a lot to learn from each other. And I'm very eager to discuss how we will both contribute to a decarbonized global economy. We're interested in building out our bilateral collaboration, and we now have the mechanism in place to do that. Last June, Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm and Denmark Minister of Climate, Energy and Utilities, Dan Jorgensen, signed a memorandum of understanding that outlines areas of planned cooperation in the fields of clean energy research, science, and technology, which is an important first step to that goal to 2050. So today, I will share a little bit about the US's path to decarbonization from the federal government's perspective, and touch on current areas of US-Danish collaboration, as well as areas where we could expand our work together. And I just want to, before I start in, I do want to echo Dan's sentiment that I do believe that this is a watershed moment. And Dan, it's terrific to see you, if even only by screen. Now, on the US climate goals, from day one, President Biden has made tackling climate change a top priority for his domestic and his international agenda. The president's US climate strategy is guided by two overarching targets. One is a carbon-free power sector by 2035, and the second is a 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions by 2050. And the US is backing up our climate goals with action. So back in November of 2021, last year, the US Congress passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, again with the acronyms, which is really the foundation of President Biden's climate plan. The bill is the largest climate investment in our nation's history. It is $500 billion. We will get our country on track to meet President Biden's goal of reducing emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. The bill includes more than $62 billion across 60 new programs. That's just the new ones of the Department of Energy. And I think I can speak for all of my colleagues at the department and within the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office when I say how eager we are to get to work to realize the benefits that this law will have on Americans and the energy sector globally. Now, specifically within our Efficiency and Renewables Office, we established 5 programmatic priorities to help us aid in that transition to a clean energy economy. And they are decarbonizing the power sector, decarbonizing transportation, decarbonizing the industrial sector, the carbon footprint, reducing the carbon footprint of buildings, and decarbonizing the agricultural sector. Each of these priorities, you'll note, focuses on a sector rather than a technology, because these are the 5 major contributors to our nation's greenhouse gas profile. And today, I will focus primarily on our overlapping work under the first 2 priorities, decarbonizing the grid and decarbonizing transportation. Now, our goal is to, on the grid, is to initiate that path to achieve a carbon-free electricity sector by 2035. We know we need to integrate more renewable energy onto the grid, as well as energy storage, get more efficient with our technologies on the grid, both at the transportation, transmission level and the distribution level, in order to bring that to a clean grid, but also to ensure that it's reliable and secure and resilient as well. Our 4 renewable power offices, solar, wind, water, and geothermal, are really laser focused on accelerating the deployment of existing resources and on driving down the cost to get that deployment accelerated. So in March of last year, just only a few months into this administration, we announced the goal of cutting the cost of solar energy by 60%, down to 2 US cents per kilowatt hour by 2030. And in that same month, we announced a goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, up from only a few megawatts. Of course, we have a lot to learn from Denmark's offshore wind program. Ørsted is the global leader in offshore wind production, and I've personally been able to visit some staging sites and things here in the United States. I'm really lucky to have that opportunity to go out and see some of our some of their offshore turbines when I'm there next week as well in Denmark. And I also noticed when I checked Wind Europe's power numbers yesterday, over 70% of Denmark's electricity was generated by wind energy. That's a stat we envy in the US, and we aspire to get to that sort of level of clean energy overall. Now, Denmark is just about under twice the size of the US state of Massachusetts. And I have this vision of the offshore wind farm required to deliver 70% of Massachusetts electricity. Denmark's advancement on offshore wind is an area where we're just really eager to learn from you all. US and Denmark are also both strong contributors to the IEA wind tests. Both countries participate in about 19 different tasks, 15 of which are in common. And Denmark has also long worked closely with our national laboratory, NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And currently, NREL is working with the Technical University of Denmark and other partners as part of the Core Wind project to drive cost reductions and performance gains for floating wind through innovations in mooring and anchoring systems in dynamic power cables. Through that collaboration and through their collaboration in the IEA Wind Task 37, which is the wind energy systems engineering, NREL and DTU are working together on efficient wind farm layout and control solutions, as well as array level offshore design. NREL, our lab, is also working with a Danish company, Steidsel Offshore Technology, to develop physics-based digital twin technologies that's going to help us to provide really tangible information to guide these predictive maintenance levels of offshore wind farms and hopefully to reduce the operations and maintenance costs. Now, these collaborations in wind technologies really show how well the US and Denmark can and should and are working together. But to decarbonize the global economy, we have to expand our collaborations to other technologies as well. And we hope to do so soon with the action plan following the US-Danish MOU from June of last year. Now, on transportation, our second programmatic priority, that is to decarbonize transportation across all modes. So that's air, sea, rail, and road. And I heard Dan speaking a little bit to the sea side of it, and as well as air. Here in EERE, our goals include accelerating the sale of new light-duty electric vehicles, minimizing the use of critical materials in EV batteries, and sourcing raw materials responsibly and domestically where possible. Meeting 100% of the nation's sustainable aviation fuel needs by 2050, creating, of course, new opportunities for refinery workers, and enabling commercially viable hydrogen fuel cell long-haul heavy-duty trucks and fueling infrastructure as well by 2030. Now, electrifying transportation really helps drastically cut back our emissions, as transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases today in the United States. But we especially know that we can't do this all, especially in areas that have high energy density fuels like aviation and marine and heavy-duty trucking and rail. That's where clean energy, clean hydrogen, that's where bioenergy and other green fuels come in. Industries are beginning also to implement clean hydrogen to reduce emissions, but there are still a lot of hurdles to deploy it at scales because currently hydrogen for renewable energy costs about $5 a kilogram. So that's why in June 2021, just last year, we at the Department of Energy launched the Hydrogen Earthshot. And this hydrogen shot seeks to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen to $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. We call it 111. This is an 80% cost reduction from where we are now. And we know that we can unlock new markets by reducing the cost this drastically, including for the shipping industry and steel manufacturing, and having clean ammonia, having energy storage, and heavy duty trucks run on this. So similar to Denmark's Power to X strategy, the hydrogen shot is going to play an important role in helping us to address the hurdles and deploy clean energy or clean hydrogen at scale. It makes sense that these strategies align so well, by the way, given our shared transportation decarb goals. The US co-leads and Denmark is a member of the Mission Innovation for Sustainable Aviation Fuels. And again, in June 2021, the US, Denmark, and Norway together announced that we were co-leading the zero emissions shipping mission. And through this shipping mission, we'll be working with other countries and industry in the International Maritime Organization to adopt a goal of zero emissions from international shipping by 2050. This zero emission shipping mission will engage in cooperative activities that will help deploy and test and demonstrate maritime energy technologies and make the market ready for zero emission shipping. This is a really critical step in the transition to zero carbon shipping sector. The mission we've laid out, albeit not easy, it's going to require really bold and aggressive action in this area. It's focused on the decarbonization of ocean-going commercial vessels that traditionally use petroleum-based fuels. So we're looking to shift these vessels towards zero-carbon liquid fuels like clean ammonia, clean hydrogen, green methanol, and advanced biofuels. Researching fuels or technologies in a lab is of course essential before we test them in the real world. But if a technology never leaves the lab, I really just want to leave you with this thought: it's never going to see widespread adoption. That's why we have to demonstrate that these that these technologies work. It's a critical step for maturing any technology. And so in the necessity to learn by doing, it will help us to collect really invaluable data on performance and safety and cost and durability. And that means demonstrations not only of the technologies itself, but how it fits in with the commercial viability of these technologies and how it fits into the system itself. So at DOE, we're already supporting a few demonstration efforts for maritime technologies. For example, the Hydrogen Office provided $8 million to support the construction of our country's first barge-based hydrogen production and bunkering system in California, the state of California. And when this is complete, the bunker is going to, the barge will produce about 500 kilograms of hydrogen every day, which will be used to power hydrogen fuel cell ferries and potentially other equipment at the port. So these are just a few of the ways that Denmark and the US are currently collaborating. I really appreciate your time here. As two of the world's leading clean energy countries, we do have a lot of expertise to learn from each other and to share with others, in fact. And so we're looking forward to continuing that work together on existing and new initiatives like the Mission Innovation and Clean Energy Ministerials. So thank you for the opportunity to join today's session. I really just can't wait to talk more about the decarb strategies next week on the ground in Denmark.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It was really good to hear about the very ambitious goals of the Biden administration and setting the 5 priorities backed by billions of dollars. I think we're a bit envious about that in Denmark. But as you also pointed out, there's plenty of room for expanding our collaboration in the future. And I can assure you, we look forward to welcoming you to Singapore next week for the IEA Ministerial.
Thank you so much. And you shouldn't be jealous. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Now we've heard from academia, from Dan and the public side, and now we have invited the next speaker, a leading Danish private player, to give us his perspective on green hydrogen and Power-to-X. So please welcome Mr. Roland Barn, who is the CEO of Topsøe, a global leader in catalysis and process technology, recently scaling your activities within Power-to-X and green hydrogen. And I think only last week you announced you're going to build the world's, at least for now, biggest manufacturing factory for electrolyzers in Herning. So Mr. Barn, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Finn. Yes, for now, because I hope that many more electrolyzer plants are going to be built and that they are of multi-gigawatt capacity, because we need it. Just quickly on the company, just an overview. We are just over 80 years old, privately held and family controlled. We have been traditionally selling technologies and catalysts to the petrochemical industry and the oil and gas industry for refining purposes. We are not that big, $1 billion in revenue, but we are big in terms of we have over a third of the global market in technology for hydrogen. So every third molecule of hydrogen that is being produced in the world goes through our technology. Same goes for ammonia, and to a lesser extent, almost the same for methanol, which are the three products that we have been focusing on. New to the portfolio is renewables. So this is the HEFA, HVO, bio-based fuels, where we have in the US, by the way, our technologies have an 80% market share. We are currently having about 140,000 barrels a day going through our technology. One of the things we have done throughout our history is we have pumped 10% of our revenue into R&D, which basically has given us an enormous amount of slate of technologies that are perfectly positioned for the energy transition. And as a result, we have changed our vision into this, what you see here. I will not read it. The one thing I want to say before I go on is I'm supposedly talking about Power-to-X. The one thing I want to stress is that there is an imperative to actually reduce carbon emissions much faster than Power-to-X will be able to deliver. For the simple reason that for Power-to-X, you need to start off, you need green power. If you look at the plans in the EU, the 10 million tons of green hydrogen by the end of this decade, first of all, it's a fraction of the total energy demand. Secondly, it needs 120 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. That in itself needs 250 gigawatts of green energy. And if you then think that that is about a third of all the installed wind capacity around the world, and we have to build it in 8 years, it's a bit of a challenge. So the development of Power-to-X, although it is the answer to in the long term, it will be slower. You need transitional technologies like the bio-based solutions and blue technologies as well. But it's another debate which I'll not go into here. Then you mentioned already, we are not very special because we are focusing on the hard-to-abate sectors, specifically the 5 you see here. The 5 together represent over 20% of the world's CO2 emissions. The basis of this all, as I just said, is green electrons, and then you need green hydrogen, which brings us to one of the technologies that we have, which is an SOEC technology-based proprietary electrolyzer, which we just have announced to build in this plant in Herning. From that point on, we are capable of producing either through the bottom synthetic fuels or over the top in the chemicals, ammonia, methanol, etc., etc. The importance here is that hydrogen is the basis of almost everything that the energy world needs. And you can see it here in a different schematic, where again with renewable electricity and water, we can either go to green hydrogen, or you take biogenic CO2 or direct capture CO2 with it, or nitrogen out of the air. You can get to ammonia. When you get to ammonia, you can actually crack it back into hydrogen, which is an enormous advantage because there is currently no way of transporting hydrogen in big quantities at minus 253 degrees, or use it in a plane at minus 253 degrees. So you basically use the ammonia as your battery, where you capture the energy, and you can then either use it directly or you can crack it back. There are a number of use cases for these new fuels. Obviously, hydrogen, as I said, is the basis of all. Can go direct into the chemicals industry, can go into fuels. In fuels, those cases exist, but it can go into power as well. It's questionable whether this is going to be the future, but it is possible. And it can go into steel for decarbonizing the steel industry. Again, 7% of the world's CO2 emissions, equal to personal vehicles. So just that's 7% as well, a bit more. If you go to ammonia, again, chemicals, specifically, of course, into fertilizer, but fuels as well. And this is interesting because we see more and more companies going into ammonia as a fuel solutions. The utilities in Japan, for instance, are betting big on ammonia. They have developed through Mitsubishi turbines. They see the ammonia being produced in Australia, where the energy is cheap, sun. So that is a big thing that's going to be. And fuel shipping is a very clear outlet. Methanol, same thing, fuels and power utilities. Again, in power is questionable, but definitely in fuels, you see that in maritime shipping. And what does that mean? Here you see ammonia, for instance, today is a 180 million ton market. Mainly 95% is into fertilizer. By 2050, that is, in our view, a 700 million ton market, where most of that is being taken up by power and by maritime, but as well as an energy carrier, because most of the green H2 will be produced in areas where there's no demand for it. Australia, North Africa, Chile, etc. So you need a carrier, which in our view is ammonia. Methanol, a similar story, but here more as a basis for e-fuels. Today, 90 million tons, we see a market of 500 million tons by 2050, if we want to be serious about decarbonizing. That's a $1.2, $1.3 trillion market that is being created. So it's not just good for the environment, it's good business as well. The cost of green hydrogen, we talked about it shortly in the other presentation. It's strange. Currently in Northwest Europe, gray hydrogen is at the same cost as green hydrogen because of the increase in energy prices. But it is imperative that we get the cost of hydrogen down, because ultimately we can't put an enormous mortgage on society by having to pay too much. So one of the things that we as industry have to work on extremely hard is to get the price of green hydrogen down. And one of the biggest drivers of that, by the way, is the cost of green electricity, green power. This is, we can skip loads of projects around the world. Literally, I think currently announced, I would say around 600 gigawatts of green fuels and hydrogen projects. And it's still growing every single day. I have no clue how much will be built, but it is pretty big. And you see as well where it is concentrated currently. Just now, US versus Denmark, because I was asked to say something about it, or US versus Europe. Similar path with a few differences. So we have now Repower EU here, and we are concentrating in Europe on green hydrogen. If you look at USA, there you have the hydrogen shot, which I think is a fantastic target, but again, it will come down to power. But in the US, it is not just the green hydrogen, it is blue as well. So you see much more willingness in the US to look at the transitional technologies than you see in Europe. Europe, as always, we are pure of mind, so we go for only the Holy Grail. US is much more pragmatic and say, we need to get carbon out. There are other things to do it as well. 300 billion in Europe, that's being set aside for Repower. $550 billion in the US. I don't know how much go already. Yes, it's true. No, but big money. Then last, why North America looks at blue as well? Very simple. There's lots and lots of natural gas that is captive, so it's low cost. Literally, it's a quarter of the cost of natural gas before the Ukraine natural gas in Europe. Great geology for carbon capture and storage, so you can easily get rid of the CO2. It's a proven technology. It's not as risky as all the other stuff. I mean, what we are doing, I'm saying that to my board all the time, is a bit like Moses in the desert. We know where the promised land is, we have actually no clue how to get there. So we are still finding our way and putting a lot of risk capital into these solutions. Large scale was Power-to-X is small scale. Today in the world there is only 300 megawatts installed electrolyzer hydrogen capacity. That's less than a third of an ammonia plant. So you can have far bigger scale. Of course, a bit of advertising. With our technology in blue, you can get 99.3% of the carbon out of the process. So it's virtually green. And with that, I stop. These are a few projects that you can see yourself, but I'm going over the time that's allotted. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roland, for outlining some of the challenges and also, especially in the hard-to-abate sectors, but also some of the huge potential, despite our quest for the Holy Grail here in Europe, as you call it. Now to the next element of today's program. We will have a panel discussion on Power-to-X and green hydrogen, and I will now hand over to the moderator, who is the true ambassador of hydrogen and the Power-to-X agenda here in Denmark, namely Theis Laustsen Jensen, who is the CEO of Hydrogen Denmark. Theis, please.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to moderate this panel on green hydrogen and its role in the global green transition. And luckily for us and for me, we have a great panel gathered to do that. So I would like to welcome to the stage also Jens Christoffersen, Executive Vice President at OE. And also I'd like to welcome Cecily Forsvold, Head of Section at the Danish Energy Agency and responsible, division, at the Danish Energy Agency and responsible for the quite extensive Power-to-X efforts being undertaken as we speak at the Energy Agency. And last but not least, online we have the pleasure of welcoming Janice Lin, founder and president of the Green Hydrogen Coalition. So welcome to all of you, and I look forward to our discussion. We're here today to discuss, as we have already heard from our previous speakers also, how green hydrogen and the hydrogen-based fuels generated off the hydrogen can be a tool in transition and decarbonization of societies. So I think my first question to all of you would be how do you see the potential and what are perhaps also the one main obstacle that we're currently facing? I'm sure there's more than one, but the main one, and maybe Cecil, if you would begin.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Unfortunately, Marie Himmed was not able to be here, so I will try to be the best stand-in as possible. To answer your first question, the green transition requires a fundamental transformation of our society, and at the moment, even faster. And this entails that we expand the tools we already know, but also new ones. And I think green hydrogen is one of those, and it has potential in quite a few ways. It reduces industry emissions, ensure competitiveness, ensure industrial leadership, development of green fuels, and improve energy security. And from a more technical point of view, it also helps keeping an energy system in balance, when it's mostly relying on fluctuating renewables. I think Power-to-X technologies makes it possible to use, as already said, renewable sources, the ability to produce fuels and chemicals that we currently produce from fossil fuels. And that is why I think Power-to-X is important in our Powertrain Strategy that is already mentioned. We said firstly we need the direct electrification, but green hydrogen can contribute to the green transition in the sector where direct electrification is not possible or associated with higher costs. So, as already mentioned, it is especially in the industrial sector, the heavy road transportation, and shipping and aviation. And for your last question, it's maybe a bit difficult to mention one thing. I think with the strategy and the agreement, we try to make a plan. We also try to ensure a national target, and a priority some investment. But from our point of view, it's I think the regulatory framework that is mostly important to work with from now on.
Well, thank you very much, and over to you, Janice. Basically the same question: the potential and one main obstacle here for beginning.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. I really appreciate the opportunity to join this panel today. What an exciting opportunity to further collaboration. So I would say that the opportunity is threefold. One, it's a viable and scalable solution to combating climate change and truly achieving economy-wide decarbonization. You know, I've been working in clean energy for now more than 2 decades, and I tell my friends and family for the first time since I joined, this clean energy movement, I really see a pathway for truly achieving economy-wide decarbonization, going after those hard-to-abate sectors. Power-to-X is also a viable solution to diversifying our fuel supply, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, and increasing energy independence and security. Never has this been more acute and important than in Europe today. And the third reason I think is, Power-to-X is a viable solution for repurposing much of our existing infrastructure, enabling an orderly and just transition. It's not okay to say to these fossil industries that have been employing many people that you're just going to go away. We can actually reuse much of that infrastructure and the skilled workforce that exists there. One of, I would say, the biggest barriers that we deal with here, and I think is present in some degree all over the world, is really just, I know it sounds cliche, but education and awareness. To achieve a green hydrogen economy and economy-wide decarbonization, it requires alignment, it requires collaboration, and not everybody is there. And there's tremendous educational gaps on how hydrogen is made, is it safe, how do you use it? And there's history too. So when I say history, some of the groups that are showing up have history working with some of the other groups that are trying to advance hydrogen. So we're dealing with a fundamental lack of alignment and education, plus overcoming historical baggage. So that is what I would say is our biggest barrier. But the good news is it's addressable. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I think a very, very interesting perspective. And Jens, same question to you, perhaps especially on the obstacles.
Yeah. Okay, but before I get to that, perhaps a bit of a positive sign also, because I agree also that the potential we saw before is vast, and I don't think we can measure at the moment. It's land-based fuel for transport, it's aviation fuel, it's shipping fuel, not the least. But also steel, as was mentioned a couple of times here, direct reduction of steel, as they are striving to do in Sweden on a mega scale, is very, very interesting from my point of view. Perhaps the next step is to go to the polymers and so on, the whole business about our plastic use and so on. Could that also be somehow a variant of the hydrogen business we're speaking of today? So a huge potential, definitely. The good news, I think, is that that we may face some very challenging years ahead of us with expanding the renewable energy production, getting the technologies right, and so on. But we don't have to push the complications further in the value chain with the products we're speaking about today. Sustainable aviation fuel is almost entirely identical with existing fossil aviation fuel. Green ammonia is basically just ammonia, and green steel, which are producing in Sweden and elsewhere, can metallurgically be exactly the same as the steel we use today. So the off-takers, they can base a lot of their activities on known regulatory environments, on known insurance conditions, and so on. And that brings me to the hard part here, and that is exactly also, as has been pointed out before by several of the speakers here, that we need to have a marketplace, and a marketplace needs some kind of governance or regulatory borderlines. And before we have that, I think it'll be very, very hard to move on. So we need somehow the flexible but also firm when needed regulatory systems in place. Otherwise, I think we'll keep hitting some snags on the road. Yeah.
But at the same time we're in a hurry, and we need to sort of scale up the production of both renewable power and the hydrogen value chain at the same time as we are implementing this regulation. How do we do that in a way that we don't wait for 5 years for regulation, but at the same time we'll sort of mess things up along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question for all of us here, because the wave is moving. So the projects are getting real. We have, as we know here, we could see before also that it is real life applications now. So the wave is being pushed forward, but we do need to have a really emphasis on, you can say, regulation, on how to insure projects. At the moment, I can say from our company, the most expensive project insurances we have to buy now costs in the US about 40% of the insured value. And that's definitely not sustainable on any scale. So I don't have the perfect answer for you, but I think it's something we need to have a different mindset, I can say. Because normally you could say to make an EU standard, a new code, would take between 5 and 10 years, and we don't have that time on our hands here.
And then perhaps it's easy to ask the regulator then, will the mindset be ready and the regulation be ready? Perhaps a bit of an unfair question, but nonetheless.
Not if I ask, if you ask those, I think, but and I think the last part you said that, especially from our point of view in Denmark, that in some kind of way we have both to make sure that the European legislation is handling this at the same time. As you say, we cannot wait, but what is the right way to go in Denmark until we have some EU legislation? So I think that is the trade-off and very important decisions at the moment to some kind of way maybe do some steps in Denmark with our national legislation. At the same time, looking what are we thinking that is coming from EU, to make sure that we are not moving in two directions, but hopefully trying to take the right directions to some legislation that could later on be EU legislation.
Obviously, the linkage between the EU legislation and national legislation is not a issue across the pond in the US. But Janice, how do you see the pathway forward also in terms of market development and regulation in the US? Jens mentioned insurance premiums for projects being an issue on the US market, but also just in general. How does that look from your point of view?
Yes, I couldn't agree with Jens more that we need a common market framework, and the more consistent the underlying legal and regulatory framework, the definitions, the easier it'll be to have a globally harmonized market. And we have a lot of work to do. We're tracking progress carefully in Europe, having very similar conversations here in North America. And I'm really encouraged by the collaboration that's happening at the national level, at the regional level. It's our belief that green hydrogen will someday be one of the world's most traded global commodities. And to do that, we need to have very common frameworks, even starting with how we define green hydrogen, its carbon intensity, how we track and retire and compensate for its environmental attributes. these are conversations that are happening now. And what's been really challenging, and gets back to my earlier point, is even locally, regionally, nationally, it's difficult to arrive at these foundational items given the history. And so the earlier speaker mentioned, I think it was the professor from Yale, said that we need innovation in technology. Yes, we need innovation in policy, absolutely. We need innovation in finance. And I would say we additionally need innovation in how groups of people come together to achieve one approach. And it's those human dynamics I see as really challenging to foster progress. And to your question of how do we get started, I agree with Deputy Secretary Kelly Speaks-Bachman that there's no substitute for learning by doing. And here at the GHC, our guide is to prioritize those areas that need fixing by the highest priority applications. So where can we achieve commercial progress quickly, and through the process of implementing very large scale projects up and down this, throughout the ecosystem, is where we'll identify where the barriers are and where we need to create alignment, regulatory innovation, so that we can achieve real steel in the ground as quickly as possible. And all along the way, innovate with our stakeholders, and the innovation that's needed, I believe is, and the Biden administration has been very good about this through the Justice 40 initiative, is to make sure that it's inclusive, that it's not just a business approach. The pathway forward needs to be co-created also with local communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Although it's we're just scratching the surface of a very interesting debate, we're also unfortunately quickly running out of time. That's perhaps also symbolic of the fact that we're really in a hurry, also on a more general point in order to achieve our goals. But if there is one question among the audience, either online or here in among the offline audience, then please, yes, Professor.
So I think there's broad agreement that innovation is critical to driving this agenda. So I wonder if you could get each of the speakers to give you in 30 seconds their critical way to drive that innovation process.
Yes, thank you for that excellent question, especially also for including the 30 seconds bit, since that is all the time we have. So yeah, Jens, you go ahead.
Thank you. Very tough question here. We have actually decided lately to invest much more in innovation in our company here than we've done in the last many years, and particularly focusing on these aspects we're discussing today. Should I point to one aspect where we actually tomorrow at the executive board, I'm quite sure we will decide to invest the most, is in floating offshore wind. I think that is the area, has been mentioned several times today. There are critical tricky points with the cables and the dynamics of them in the sea conditions here, but I think that is part of the key to get the ramping up of offshore wind, which several of the speakers before mentioned here. We need to get further offshore to have enough space actually for these enormous wind farms. So that will be our take. Thank you.
Janice, same question for you.
Yeah, so I would say the innovation that seems to be yielding the greatest results here is innovation and hub development, meaning concurrent, a multi-sectoral system approach. So rather than starting with any one technology or project top down, looking at how we can accelerate the formation of a green hydrogen ecosystem, leading with aggregated large-scale demand in targeted locations.
Thank you. And Sissel?
I think in the energy agreement from 2018, we had this thing with sandboxes. We got some good experience, maybe not as much as we hoped for. I don't think we have a new good innovation initiative, but as a follow-up on the PTX agreement, we want to make a task force, putting different people together from different sectors, as you said, trying to maybe talk about what could we do with the regulatory framework, maybe in a new innovation. Yeah.
So Thank you very much. So I think exciting times ahead, and we touched upon some very interesting points. Thank you very much to our panel, Janice Lin, founder of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, Jens Christoffersen, Executive Vice President at COVI, and Sissel Hortholt, Head of Division at the Danish Energy Agency. Thank you all very much.
Also from my side, thank you very much to Thijs for steering us through this very interesting panel debate. Now it gives me great pleasure to round off the session today with our own Dan. We've had one Dan already, Dan Jorgensen, the Danish Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities. Dan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't need a microphone.
No,
this will work.
This will work.
Okay, good to see you all, especially you, Dan. I like to remind people that small countries can make a difference by making a reference to our ancestors in this country, 1,000 years back. You know who I'm talking about. Beards, long hair, the Vikings. Some will argue not always a positive difference everywhere, but they did actually manage to discover America 500 years before Christopher Columbus. How did they do that? Well, actually, the way they did it was they managed to exploit the forces of nature, the wind. They put tremendous efforts into making the sails of their Viking ships. And in fact, it took us a long time for them to make a sail for a Viking ship as it did to build the ship itself. And it was just as important. Now, eventually, of course, that technology was transferred and spread so that in a way that became the start of a revolution of maritime transport. And then, of course, the rest is history. Now, basically, we're in a situation again now where we need to find new and better ways of exploiting the wind. We already in Denmark have come a far way. We were the first country in the world to build an offshore wind farm back in 1991. I would say probably the biggest achievement there wasn't actually building it. It was persuading the Ministry of Finance that it was a good idea to do it. I still don't know how they manage. You know, the Eskimos have 100 ways of saying snow. Ministry of Finance have 100 ways of saying no. And usually if you look at a business plan that looks the way the plan for the first offshore wind farm looked, probably that wouldn't be considered a very good way of using public funding. Now, fortunately, they did, because they saw that this was an investment in the future, an investment in a new technology that would in the future become important, and the countries that were the front runners would then, of course, also get the benefits. And we have gotten the benefits in Denmark, of course, but I would also be remiss if I didn't take a little bit credit on behalf of my predecessors in saying that their decisions have actually made a difference in the world. Not only because of Denmark, but also because of Denmark, we are now in a situation where offshore wind can compete with even coal most places on the planet in creating electricity. Now, this is important. And if you ask the International Energy Agency, they will tell you that we have potential for offshore wind in the world right now, unexploited potential, that could actually cover the entire electricity demand of the planet 18 times. 18 times. This just shows you how big a potential that's out there. Now, obviously, this is also something that refers to a situation in which we use electricity the way we use it now. Or maybe even looking into a future where we electrify more processes, where we electrify our transport systems, all of that. But I think the topic that you've been discussing today in this setting will be increasingly important and will lead to an even bigger demand in renewables in general and offshore wind specifically. Two of the big problems we have with renewables, certainly also with offshore wind, is one, how do we store the energy for when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing? Two, how do we transform that energy so that we can use it in the parts of our energy systems where we cannot electrify? So how do you say like a container ship without bunker fuels? How do you fly a plane without jet fuel? For most people, it'll probably sound like science fiction that you can have a wind turbine on the sea, making the electricity, transforming that electricity into hydrogen, and then transforming the hydrogen into fuels. But you all, of course, know that that is not science fiction. It's just science. The thing we need to do now is get it up in scale and down in price. For our small country, we see it as our task also to be front runners in that development. So we've set a ambition for ourselves to create the regulatory framework and financial incentives to have a capacity of 4 to 6 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity in 2030. This, we feel, is ambitious, obviously, but also realistic. Already now we see a multitude of different actors, national and international, wanting to invest in this in Denmark. Now, the way that we've put our strategy together and the way that we have negotiated this in the parliament has been extremely inclusive. So almost all of the ideas that are now either set into law or agreements are not laws and regulations that we just made up in the negotiation room, or that my staff and my ministry made up at their tables. It is something that we've done on the basis of a very thorough and long deliberation with industry in Denmark. So one of the first things we decided when we came into power almost 3 years ago was that if we are to make this fundamental change in the Danish society that we want to make, which is to make ourselves carbon neutral, obviously, in 2050 at the latest, but also to reduce our emissions by 70% in 2030, we cannot force this upon the Danish society. Obviously, we will need to make regulations and sometimes use sanctions and all of that, but primarily this needs to be driven in collaboration with the sectors in our industry and our businesses. So we created 14 partnerships, one for the transport sector, one for the food and agriculture sector, and so forth. And they gave us recommendations that we then, for most of them have been made now into to law. This is also why I'm quite confident that we will reach the targets that we've set, because we've set them in collaboration with the actors that are actually going to deliver on them. Now, we know for a fact, obviously, also that there are still some huge challenges. One is, okay, so when we make the liquid fuels, first we make the hydrogen, then we make that into liquid fuels. Some of them will not require us to add carbon, others will. So how do we get that carbon? How do we make sure that it's green carbon? Well, if we burn biomass, if we burn biogenic wastes, if we manage to capture the carbon from our biogas incinerators, then obviously there is a big possibility for us. And I think that that will be a big part of the solutions in the future. On the other hand, the IPCC also tells us that we need negative emissions if we are to stay below 1.5 degrees. So how do we make the exact framework and create the exact incentives to make sure that we strike that balance? Because we want to get started with carbon capture, also on biogenic sources. Now, that needs to be full scale, more or less commercial, in 2025. Are we already ready to also make the fuels in 2025? Do you want to make the deal now? Probably you hopefully will be.
Give it carbon.
Yes. So you see, this is obviously some of the challenges that we face. I would say though that these are of the more positive sort, because that then depends on how do we make the best business case. I think it's important though that as politicians we also acknowledge that sometimes when we set very ambitious targets for ourselves, as we have done with the 70%, we need to be careful that in our aim to reach that target, that we don't risk not doing other things that would actually be more rational for us to meet the long-term target of carbon neutrality. And that is the danger here, because if it was just for me to show political parties of the Danish parliament, look, we will reach the 70% no problem, then of course negative emissions as fast as possible, storage as fast as possible of all the carbon that we could get our hands on would be the rational way. But we choose not to do that, because we know that the world doesn't end in 2030, and the problem is not solved with a 70% reduction. We need to go to 100% reduction. So even though it makes it more difficult for me to reach the 70%, or for the government to reach the 70%, we know that we also need to create the incentives to have the green carbon available for the producers of the new fuels. If those fuels are used in Denmark, they will also help us reach the 70% target. If they're used in other countries, we'll help other countries, which is great because we are here to make a global transformation. Now, if we are to succeed in this on a global scale, it also means that countries need to work together better than we are doing it today. That's why, and I'll finish with this, it was so important the week before last when the heads of state of Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, and Denmark met in Esbjerg and signed the Esbjerg Declaration. Not only did they agree that we will have 150 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea by 2050, which is huge, obviously, by any standard. We also agreed to work very closely together on the infrastructure surrounding this. So, for instance, the hydrogen infrastructure. And I signed a bilateral agreement with my German colleague the same day to also speed up our collaboration on this exact topic. So a lot of good news, still a lot of challenges ahead, but we are moving in the right direction. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ben, for ending on this upbeat note and for outlining the very ambitious goals of the government. And not least for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. We really appreciate it.
Putin just made it a little bit more difficult.
Yes, I just noticed. Yes, no more gas to bust it. So this was the last element of today's event on decarbonization, green hydrogen, and power to X. I hope you all learned something. I did, certainly. Green hydrogen and electrofuels are vital elements when looking at our future energy system and wanting to especially integrate renewables such as wind, biogas, and solar into the system. From State of Green's side, we have gathered some of the key Danish innovations and solutions in this short paper here. It's over on the table. You can take one when you go out. It's also available online. And the other thing I wanted to say is that we will be in New York for the New York Climate Week in September, together with a number of Danish and US partners where we hope to meet as many of you as possible to discuss clean technologies, public-private partnerships in particular, and also obviously green hydrogen. So if you want to know more about what we do at State of Green, follow us on stateofgreen.com. You can sign up for our newsletter in English to stay updated on green solutions from Denmark. And last but not least, for those of you joining us in person here, we have some bubbles ready for you over at the table. And unfortunately, our online viewers and speakers cannot participate this time, but we perhaps can make it up in New York. Last but not least, a very big thank you to all our speakers, to Thijs, our moderator, and an equally warm thank you to all our online followers who have actively engaged in today's event. I hope you feel inspired by what you've learned today. Thank you and have a good evening. Kom over på et glas. Der er også øl til dem, der ikke vil have bobler.
It's a difficult news day in
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we're not modeling around this local market.